Well, welcome back to the news today. This is the Daily Debate. Well, in the last month, the Houthi Shiite rebels, backed by Iran, are gaining more and more ground in Yemen. Well, the rebels say they're demanding a bigger share of power and a change in the country's political order following the 2011 protest that forced longtime leader Ali Abdullah Saleh out of office. Well, Yemen has a Sunni majority and has been controlled by them throughout its modern history. And yet we have another example for the struggle between Shiite and Sunnis that are raging across the Middle East. Well, joining me are Middle East analysts Avi Issacharoff and Ali Waked. But before we get into the discussion, let's see what our viewers think with our deputy editor, Nurit Zongar. Nurit, what do you have for us?
Good evening, David. So we've discussed extensively on the news today these regional shifts, new friendships, and so on, and how it's going on behind the scenes in the Middle East, at least, is far more telling, of course, than just the fight on the ground. So we took Yemen as a case in point. We asked our viewers if the clashes going on there are, in fact, a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Let's first of all take a look at our poll globally to see what i24 News viewers had to say. 64% said it's a proxy war, 17% said no, 19%, even more than the no's, had no opinion, maybe a reflection of how complex and maybe hard to understand the situation there really is. Let's take a look at our viewers now. Mutlak went for the sort of basic, perhaps more simplistic approach. He mentions the eating of gat in the country. I'm going to put that aside for a moment. Maybe your debaters can add to that. But he says it's a poor country, perhaps a bit of a lack of education, that they haven't advanced as much as others. Perhaps he pegs these sort of conflicts to that kind of tribalism. Let's look at some of the other approaches that we had that focus a lot, of course, on the Sunni and Shia conflict. Noah wrote to us in French. I'll translate. She says, Shiite rebels are fighting each other to reconquer the territory that they occupied before. She says it has nothing to do with Iran and Saudi Arabia. Others, though, didn't agree. Mathieu said it's mostly a war of influence that puts two Islams against each other, as is increasingly the case in the Middle East. He goes on to say for years, Iran and Saudi Arabia have supplied the rivalry between Sunnis and Shiites across the Middle East. That Yemen is just one example. And let's just end with Claude, who said, yes, this Yemen war must be seen as a direct conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Claude says the Iranians support Shiites across the Middle East and encourage violence, of course, like in Lebanon, a good example he brings up, and that the neighboring Saudis are equally the defenders of the Sunni cause. So perhaps this is an example of what conflict sort of looks like today across the Middle East. You have seemingly scattered rebel groups or militias with the power of major countries actually acting behind them. So I'm sure the two in there in the studio have a lot more to say. I'll pass it back to you.
We'll get into that again. Thank you, Nurit, for that. Look at our viewers' responses there. Well, Avi, let's talk about both sides in this conflict now are being backed by outside players here. We know about the Houthis being backed by Iran in this struggle. Now, what about the Saudi influence in the country here? This is Saudi Arabia's backyard, essentially. What are they doing in this conflict?
They're trying to help the Sunnis. They're trying to help the regime. It doesn't necessarily work because the Houthis are managing to continue forward, to take all kinds of cities like Hodeidah, like Sana'a a couple of weeks ago, and they are showing better performance on the ground, on the military level, of course. So I guess that in this field, Yemen, this time the Saudis are losing. I don't know if it's temporarily, if it's not, but for the meanwhile, the Saudis are losers.
Losing with their influence. Now Iran, we've seen the Houthis on a roll, essentially, now through Yemen. Do you think this is a direct product of Iranian training and armament?
It's no doubt, and it's not the first time, as Avi said, that the Saudis lose in front of the Houthis. We do remember that a couple of years the Saudis needed the ceasefire, needed the intervention of some Pakistanis experts and another in order to stop the progress of the Houthis towards the Saudis' territories and soil. But David, if you allow, please, I want to emphasize over the larger picture. And the larger picture in this inter-Yemenite fight showed that the emphasis today has shifted from fighting the Iran nuclear plan to the and the focus is now on fighting the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda and the Sunni jihadism.
Of the West, you're saying?
Yes, and what am I saying this? Because we know, and from talking with Yemenite sources, we understand the following, that the regime in place in Yemen, who is supported, who is backed by the United States, is using the Houthis to fight Al-Qaeda. So the central government is using the Houthis, who are Shiites. The central government is a Sunnite government, is using the Houthis with the green light of the international community to fight Al-Qaeda, which proved that the priority is fighting.
Which is where the U.S. has put all their assets.
Exactly, which can be also a sign towards the negotiations that will be relaunched between Iran and the Western superpower in the coming days.
Well, what's the significance of Yemen? This is, as we may have seen from the poll with our viewers here, that the large percentage of people that had no opinion, it's not a place that's gotten too much focus from at least mainstream media. It's been there. It's been a story there. And of course, the U.S. has put a lot of resources into this place. But what's the significance today of what's taking place in Yemen?
So, of course, it's the control over Bab al-Mandab, those the Gulf over there, the entrance and the exit from the Red Sea. So it has a major importance for all countries around, whether it's Iran or Saudi Arabia and even Israel. I mean, for Israel, it is a strategic area which might have a big effect on the trade that Israel is now having in all over the world. Meaning, if at some point, just let imagine that if something will happen over there and the Houthis will take over, and there will be some presence of, I don't know, revolutionary guards or Iranian security forces, we might find ourselves that Israeli ships will be under attack from all kinds of missiles that will be supplied by the Iranians to some rebels that are sitting in Yemen. And for that reason, for Israel, it is a very major issue here. It is a source of worrying, except for all the other fronts that we're facing today.
And David, as Avi said, it's not only the Bab al-Mandab and the ocean in the Red Sea, and what we know that the Red Sea is used for Israeli ships and others. It is also Yemen, as we see in the card, has borders with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the world number one producer of oil. So imagine that this region,
these borders are controlled by these rebels.
Imagine that this region is destabilized by this war in Yemen. The impact that this can have over the oil prices, the oil production in the world. It is no doubt that, as said, unlike one of our viewers said, the Yemen is a back front in this war between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Is Yemen, as we know it, gone, in your opinion, since 1990, the end of the Civil War, when the North and South came together now to form modern Yemen? Do you believe that that is now off the table, that agreement is gone?
Officially, the Yemenite parliament declared a couple of months ago defined Yemen as a federation, which means that he gave more autonomy and more local power to the provinces, but yet the southern parts of the Yemenite Republic are demanding their independence and are demanding to officially divide Yemen into two Yemen. The southern part, which we remember was part a socialist republic that belonged to the Soviet bloc, in contrary to the northern part that was led by the Congress Party. But to see how much complicated is the Yemenite picture, the regime in place, the government is accusing the former president Ali Abdullah Saleh of collaborating with the Houthis. Ali Abdullah Saleh, who was for a long time the big ally of Saudi Arabia in her fight against Iran, is now accused to be supporting the Houthis in their fight against the central regime.
After the Saudis worked so hard in the transition of power there, which was to get Saleh out of power, that is. Let's talk about the United States and their role in the situation. They've certainly meddled in the politics of Yemen. Many airstrikes just weeks ago, as President Obama rolled out his plan for tackling the Islamic State. He cited Yemen and Somalia as being case studies for successful anti-insurgent operations. Now, many airstrikes targeted hits only on Al-Qaeda in Yemen, but also within the government, a lot of meddling there too. But now they're gone. I mean, now they're completely out of the picture, it seems, there, as this crisis has hit Sana'a. Why is the U.S. not paying any attention to this?
So first of all, at last, we don't have ISIS in the picture. So now if you listen to the news in the US, it's all about ISIS and ISIS and ISIS.
Well,
now that you don't have ISIS, so suddenly it's irrelevant almost to what's going on in Yemen, because it deals with this whole jihadists, Al-Qaeda. Do you remember them? Suddenly
Barely,
they are the
seems.
ones that are still relevant for Yemen. And yes, Al-Qaeda are still attacking the Houthis, the Shiites, and of course the government, and they're fighting everyone. So we have the South on one hand, we have the Houthis on the other side, we have Al-Qaeda operating over there, and we have the government. And in this terrible mess in Yemen, and
the tribes.
And the tribes, of course. But the tribes are between all those different groups. And in this terrible mess, the United States, the administration, needs to find its place and what's the right move to do. I don't envy the decision makers in the US. I think that it's mission impossible to think about what should we do in Yemen right now in order to make a better Yemen.
Well, what about preserving the regime that they worked hard to support and this transition of power that we mentioned? It seems they turned their back on that whole process now, that it's lost. It's been squandered here.
In a way, it's lost. In a way, I think that the United States, and especially President Obama, gave up, the option of changing the face of the Middle East. He understands, the administration understands that it's such a messy Middle East. This is the new Middle East, when you cannot really say what will happen the next day. The same day that we had a day before, on last Monday, we had some kind of an agreement between the Houthis, the government, about appointing a new prime minister. The day after, the Houthis took over Hodeidah. The same day, there was a demonstration in the south, in Eden, meaning, I don't see how the U.S. can really help here. Not in Yemen, not in many other places in the Middle East.
Ali, is the face of the new Middle East now these failed states, borders collapsing? Is this just the inevitable future of the region now? Is Yemen just another case study for how stability, at least national stability, is almost non-existent?
It's a case to show that the borders that were drawn, the borders of the Middle East, as they were drawn by the French and the British, are now put on the table. Exactly. And this is why some secular elites who are anti-Islamic State by ideology are interested by the changes that the Islamic State is causing to the region, and the fact that the Islamic State is erasing borders between countries, artificial borders that were imposed to the region by the Western, in this case by Great Britain and by France. But as Avi said, the fight is between Islam and forms of Islam, the Shiite Islam and the Sunnite Islam. But we should make no mistake. The vision and the direction of the Middle East is going toward the political Islam, and the West has to choose what kind of political Islam it wants to deal with. It is true that the Muslim Brotherhood failed in Egypt, and they were replaced by the army. But as a friend, exactly, as a friend told me, even when the stock markets are getting high, there are some days of corrections, and the markets get down. This is what happened to the political Islam with the failure of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. We can see what is happening now in Libya. We can see that still the main players in Syria and in Iraq that are fighting the regimes are Sunnite jihadist militias. So the West need to decide what should be, who does he want to be as a partner in the Middle East. It won't be in any case liberal elements. It won't be in any case secular actors. This is why I do agree with Avi that the West doesn't understand where this region is going. When we see the Yemeni tribes embracing the Al-Qaeda, supporting Al-Qaeda in Yemen, in Iraq, and in elsewhere, and it's not a phenomenon. It's already a symptom of a situation, and I'm afraid that this train is late to be caught by the West.
Well, I have to come back to the U.S., the world's great power here, and involved in all these countries, as we mentioned, Yemen, now airstrikes in Syria and Iraq. There are many people who feel abandoned, as you mentioned, that they can't find their way in this conflict, that the U.S., in this greater conflict in the region, the U.S. can't pick a side. They don't understand the realities on the ground. There are Sunni tribes in Syria, for example, that feel abandoned, who are fighting the Islamic State, who haven't received any aid from the United States or supportive airstrikes, and have been the subject of slaughters, one after another here now. Is it impossible for them to find their way, do you feel, or can the ship be righted?
Well, really, I don't know what to say here, but I think that they're not the only ones. I mean, if the only thing that I can tell them, guys, you're not the only ones that are feeling abandoned by the U.S. Okay. Look at what happened to Mahmoud Abbas. Look what happened to Hosni Mubarak. Look at the more moderate camp or the liberal camp that is feeling completely abandoned by the U.S. and there's no real partner here in the.
Are they counting the days of the Obama administration like?
They are. Look, I'll tell you more than that. I don't think that they even expect something to happen in the U.S. even after the replacement of President Obama.
Avi Issacharoff and Ali Waked, thank you both for joining us for this daily debate, and thank you to our viewers. We'll be right back after a short break with One on One.